Hi, everybody. I'm Donald James, the Executive Director of Cite and the host of the Blue Ribbon Project. I am beyond thrilled today to have as my guest, Meisha Porter. Many of the listeners here will know Meisha. She served as Chancellor of New York City Schools, did some tremendous work in the city as Chancellor, but I know that she also had a long and illustrious career prior to that, working in our schools. I've never met anybody that had anything but positive things to say about Meisha. So I was really happy when Meisha agreed to do this. Meisha has since left the chancellor's position and is now the president and CEO of the Bronx Community Foundation.
That is correct.
I'm gonna really at this point turn it over to Meisha. She is, as you know, an amazing public speaker, somebody that just brings a tremendous wealth of knowledge that I'm excited to hear about and for our listeners to hear about. So Meisha, could you just talk to us a little bit about your time as Chancellor and
Sure.
what you were most proud of in that work?
Absolutely. So, my time as Chancellor, many people know came at just a difficult time and a difficult moment to be Chancellor. And many people ask me why did I decide to take on the role at that time? Despite the tremendous amount of work that was to be done, it's New York City, it's an election cycle, and we know what happens in New York City during an election cycle. But I really took on the position because I felt like those of us in public education, no matter where we sat, had a lot of opinions about how systems were running during the pandemic. And for me in particular, having spent my entire career in the Bronx, I felt like there were too many decisions that were being made in service of adults and not enough decisions in service of children. And so it was like I was challenged, right? When we all were a part of all kinds of group chats and text messages when different decisions came on. And so the opportunity to become the chancellor was a challenge to me to say, do you sit on the sidelines and continue to have conversations about what's right or wrong or indifferent, or do you jump in and do what you can for whatever time that you have? And that's what I decided to do. I did it for my own children, who are my 16-year-old daughter, who's a student in this system, my family members who are teachers in this system. And for me, who, if this had happened when I was in middle school, high school, or elementary school, I would have needed a system that stepped up for me. And so that's why I did it. And the best part of it for me was opening. I've said over and over again, my priorities were to open. And we did that. We opened high schools up. We opened an exciting new summer program, Summer Rising, and I know Chancellor Banks is continuing it with Summer Rise 2.0. So I'm excited about that. We left a legacy for what summer should look like for all young people across New York City. And it is really about an asset-based approach. And reopening our system, as I went around the city, September and October, I just heard from families, teachers, leaders, and most importantly, children, how excited they were to be back in school and how important it was for them.
Yeah, sure. So of course, getting everybody back in school in the summer program, absolutely terrific. But I applaud you for being willing to step up when it was a scary time. To manage schools, and it almost seemed like there was no right answer. Just followed your heart, and that's what I saw looking in from the outside as a superintendent on the island. I watched and I said, "This woman is following her heart," and I think that was terrific. And of course, it was obvious to me that you had the best interest of students at heart. So that was clear and obvious. So that as a somebody who has worked in the system, I don't now, but when I did, I thank you for that, because the system did need leadership.
Thank
you.
Thank
you did a great job, and you were present.
Yes.
And that's half the job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as well as I do, in moments of crisis, people need to see their leader. They need to feel connected to their leader. And I've had that experience as a teacher, as an AP, in every role that I've had in the system. But we've never had a crisis like this. And I knew how important it was for me to be present and visible, and doing the things I was asking people to do. I was asking people to come to work. I was asking young people to come to school, and they needed to see me doing the things I was asking them to do.
Do you think once the pandemic is over, because frankly, I don't think it's over. I think that we're still dealing with pandemic issues, and we will be dealing with post-pandemic issues for years to come. Do you think in some ways that the system will be better, or
I
will?
think, yeah, I think it is a really an important moment. I think the system can be better if we push against what we want, which is human instinct is to get back to normal after crisis. And normal in school systems across the country um, still left so many students unserved or underserved, so many communities underserved. And those communities, the ways in which they weren't being served was highlighted in the pandemic. And so I think this is a moment to really think about what our new normal should look like in school systems. I think a lot about the way we leverage technology really quickly. And then I went back in my mind to, when I was a student in school, and my school was excited that they felt like we were becoming a 21st century learning center. And in those days, it was those big, huge Mac computers with the clear backs, right? And then when I became a teacher, it was computer labs and laptop carts. And then when I became a leader, it became smart boards and the way to engage interactively, iPads and all of those things. And what the pandemic actually taught us was a 21st century classroom is the space in which teachers and students engage together with technology to further student learning. So I think how we leverage technology going forward is going to be important for how we make our system better. I also think, we learned a lot about facilities, right? Like the facilities team at the New York City Department of Education has so much respect for me for being frontline heroes who were never celebrated in the way that they should have been. From our custodians to the facilities people at Central, those folks, transformed ventilation systems, cleaned buildings from top to bottom every day, learned how to work in a new way. But what we learned is we have to build different kinds of facilities. And I think the other thing the lesson I want systems to take from the pandemic is, what does every child in every community deserve in a facility, in a school, in a teacher, in a classroom, in a building? What do some communities deserve more of? How does it look different? And design buildings that are, I was last week in San Diego visiting High Tech High, and their facilities are amazing. And I was thinking, in New York City, we don't have the land to build a campus, but we know how to build up creatively. Sure. And so I just think about facilities. I think about how we leverage technology in new and exciting ways, and how we leverage student voice, because we heard from young people so clearly and succinctly about what was important to them. And we also heard from their parents. And so I think we just have to think differently. We cannot push back to normal, because normal wasn't good for so many young people. And we learned a lot, and how we leverage it is going to be really important.
I think you hit on really great points there, not the least of which is the old normal, right? Yep. You hit on it, right? People want to go back to the way it was. Well, first of all, I personally don't think it can ever be the way it was. And frankly, the way it was wasn't so great for some people. So how can you're right. I agree with that. So hopefully that systems recognize that, both New York City and others, that, hey, there are ways. Schools are really interesting places. And I know it's an industrial model, and we do the best we can with the structures that we have, but those structures don't serve everybody the way they should. Right. And so certainly lower socioeconomics struggle with that structure more than others. So making adjustments, I think, is really great. You made a great point there. So let's move and start talking a little bit about your new role.
Yeah.
Right. So you're the president and CEO of the Bronx Community Foundation.
Yeah.
That sounds exciting, but I don't really know what you do. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Either. No. You know what it is for me, really? It's my career coming full circle. I started as a youth organizer in the Bronx. with a youth group, and out of that youth group grew the proposal for the school, the Bronx School for Law, Government, and Justice, the first urban assembly school, the school that I ultimately became a teacher and a leader in. And so the Bronx Community Foundation is really, first of all, about addressing inequities that face the borough. It also is about recognizing that it's time to put boroughs like the Bronx. It's time to put the borough of the Bronx first. The Bronx is the only borough that doesn't have a community foundation, and the foundation that is solely dedicated to, you know, interrupting long-term, long-standing systemic inequities in our boroughs. And so we're looking to work with community members through a participatory grant-making process to, you know, address our 4 pillars that are super important to us, but that we also believe, you know, our 4 pillars will really address ways in which we need to interrupt those areas of you know, inequity in our system. And so we're focusing on health, economic security, equity and justice, digital equity, housing. And we want to work with community members to raise funds, but also to provide resources to innovative and creative ways to begin to look at and solve those problems. And I think what's important in this moment about the foundation is it is led by me. That's not the most important thing, but I am from the Bronx. You know, I've raised my family in the Bronx. I live in the Bronx now. I believe in the Bronx. I always have. And our founders, Derek and Desmond Lewis, are 2 brothers who believe very deeply in the power of philanthropy and what it can do for a community, because they see themselves as direct benefactors of philanthropy in the Bronx.
Wow. So it sounds exciting.
Yeah.
And meaningful. And you're right, coming around full circle is really interesting. So I know we're here to talk about Meisha, but I'll talk about Don for a minute. So I found the same thing when I decided it was time to step aside from the superintendency after close to 20 years. And I moved into this company that I'm working with now, Cite, who I know you took some classes with us.
Yes.
And the company's goal is to actually serve people who typically aren't served well by institutions of higher learning, making it accessible, making it affordable, making it meaningful. And for me, I'm like, you know, this is, you know, if we really want to support change in the system, one way to do that is to make sure that we get really good people into the system.
Yep.
Sometimes people that would be really good in the system can't access the system.
Absolutely.
And so I feel the same way, Meisha, that I came sort of full circle. And so that's why when I saw you on LinkedIn, I was really excited. I said, oh, and I knew you took some classes. I said, I'm going to contact her and see. Yeah, maybe not, because not everybody reads their LinkedIn, or you know, maybe you're too busy, or that's okay. And I said, well, yeah, if I hear from her, great. But if I don't, I mean, if I do, boy, I'm not going to miss this. If she says, you know, Thursday at 1, I'm going to be there. And as you know, I mentioned before we got on the air, I'm sitting in a school, PS 375, the Jackie Robinson School in Brooklyn, because I was visiting today, working with the principal, Mecca Gators, and she is just terrific and is engaged. The kids are, you know, just outstanding. And you know, I don't know if you can hear it, but or if our listeners are going to be able to hear, but I can hear the kids playing on the playground. Nothing makes me happier than to be in a building like that. And like you've spent my entire adult life. Actually, I spent my entire life in schools, because as a kid, I went to school. Yeah, my entire adult life in school. So, what would you say to aspiring teachers or administrators? Now, we know there's a shortage of teachers, and there's a shortage for a lot of reasons. You know, whether they're not well paid, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of public disrespect, there's people trying to control what's happening in the classroom. There's all kinds of reasons, but there are also a lot of really good reasons to become a teacher or a leader, a building principal, which, by the way, 1 in 5 schools in New York will have a new principal next year. Yeah, 1 in 5.
That's right. Yeah.
So what would you say to them?
You know,
words of advice, because we just need those words of advice from you, Meisha.
So you know, my words of advice would be, this is such important work and we need you. And today, just today, 1 hour ago, I got a message through social media from one of my former students. And I get messages from young people all the time saying how proud they are of me, like, thank you to me. And to me, when I get this, so this came from a young person who says, I'll just read a little bit. I wanted to express how thankful I am for all the work you did this past year. It was something I witnessed and felt proud to know you and to have been one of your babies back at LGJ. I still have the article announcing you back in the Bronx. And I want you to know that without you, the work you contributed to all of us, the important and overly ignored, would not have been issues that we work on addressing today in education. And that's the why. It's because a grown man someday, who's will always be a child in your heart, will reach out and say thank you, will reach out and say you saw me when no one else saw me, will reach out and say, can you write me a letter of recommendation? Because I know you remember me. Young people who have struggled through high school and middle school, you get to see them have promising careers that they didn't even see for themselves. And so, with all of the things surrounding public education, impacting the lives of young people and getting messages like that, that's what we do the work for. That's the payment, right? Like the payment is, if I change the trajectory of one young person's life. And another young person, one of my former students, was speaking at my school yesterday, and he sent me his words and just wanted to acknowledge me because I wasn't there, but wanted to bring me into the space. And that's why we do this work. And so I'll say my favorite job was being a principal. My favorite teacher is my mother, my first teacher. But I became all of the things I became in this world because of teachers who saw me, because of teachers who pushed me or challenged me or interrupted my life when things were challenging. And, I think teachers deserve to be paid at higher levels, absolutely, without question. But there's no payment greater than that to me. There's no payment greater than a young person saying thank you, or saying I'm proud of you, right? Like, we usually send that back to the young people that we're connected to when we see them do great things. But to hear that, as a Black woman who led in this system, and who was the first Black woman to lead in this system, for so many of my students, they look like me, they come from families like me, and that they're our why. And so I think my advice would be, in that long story, is remember your why, stay grounded in your why, because you will be fulfilled every day if you work in that space every single day.
I mean, that's just great advice. And I certainly, looking in from the outside, was extremely proud when you rose through the ranks, and you were a principal, and I loved being a principal. I was a superintendent for so long, I'm not sure. I switch hats, right? Because I love both of those roles, but the principal's position, and then you making sure that you took over when the system was in crisis to support your principals and your students. It was, for me, looking in, I was like, this is a great person doing great work. I don't typically blow smoke, so this is not
Thank
that.
you.
This is me sort of recognizing your work. I think we have a mutual friend, Lorna Lewis.
Yes.
Lorna is out on the island, and she and I have worked on a number of different things together when we were, then I don't want to bring up a sore subject if it's sore, but she and I were really anti-testing, and at a time when testing was really bad.
Not sore for me. I agree. I think we are over testing, and even in this moment, like I think about my advice to systems is, right, like to really rethink this moment. And kids got into college, kids went on to the next grade, kids learned things, and they didn't take a test a year ago.
Imagine. It's okay to test, but not every single year.
Yes, yes.
And ad nauseum. And I worked with Lorna and others, and we wrote legislation that unfortunately didn't get passed, but we were fighting an uphill battle, but we were proud to do that fight. So I've been proud to stand side by side with folks like you. And maybe I'll get to work with you in the future moving forward.
We'll see. That would be wonderful.
That would be great. So before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to add, say? And I'll just leave it to you.
Yeah, I'll leave with this. I think two things. One, back in the advice realm for leaders, for teachers, for folks who are aspiring to move up in systems. Don't forget the last job that you're currently supervising, right? Like when I was a superintendent, I tried to really stay grounded in what principals needed. When I was a principal, I tried to stay grounded in what teachers needed. And always challenged myself to think about how would I experience, or how would a decision I was making drive me if I was in one of those roles that I was supervising. So it's always, we always hear, don't forget where you came from. And I think that is true in leadership also. And the other thing is advice that I really want to give to systems and system leaders. I think this is the moment when systems need to change the way they show up and shift to work in service of schools and communities and teachers and principals and leaders. And that is a critical shift. One of the things that when I was chancellor, I would always ask my team, how will this land in a school? How will this land in a leader? Have you spoken to principals? Have you spoken to teachers? And as the folks that are really doing the hard work are sitting where you are, they're sitting in school buildings, they're sitting with teachers and leading teachers, their principals, their teachers, their custodians, their cafeteria workers, their young people in classrooms, their guidance counselors, their safety agents, their all of the people that the secretaries and school aides, right? All of those people are the ones that are really doing the heavy lift right now. And it's up to the system to turn itself around and really ask, how can we serve you? And so that's what I really hope to see systems do over the next few years, to really think strategically about how do we turn ourselves to being a service provider as opposed to a hierarchical organization that has expectations of schools, as opposed to schools having expectations of systems. So,
yeah, so I will tell you, and I think that's the greatest advice. In fact, I was having a conversation today that we are in service.
Yeah.
So we serve to support the teachers who support the students. So
That's right.
that if we all take that on and be in service of, and I agree, the hierarchy is meaningless to me, right? And I think in service will truly support organizations growing and learning and supporting students and what they need. Meisha, you've been terrific. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
And to keep up to date on everything Cite, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Cite Online. That's CITEONLINE. And you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. Till next time.